Hi, my name is Dale Kaplan, and I direct the Photographs and Photobooks department at Swann Galleries. We're very pleased to be offering Photobooks from the library of Bill Diodato and select photographs by numerous 20th century artists. The sale will take place on February 27th at 3 p.m. Now Bill will share personal recollections about his library and collection of photographs.
Initially, somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, I received a small scholarship that I had to use for educational purposes only. And they were very limited because I already had my student loan, so it was very limited what I could do with the money, so I started buying photo literature. It was at that point that I got the little bit of the bug. It took many years later to really fully grab me. The history of photography is not something you can just look up on the internet and in a couple of hours understand it. It's a very time-consuming endeavor. I realized I didn't know what I didn't know. And at a certain point, I realized that every time I discovered something about an artist whom I did enjoy, I discovered an artist that inspired them that I'd never heard of. And it was at that point that I said, well, how can this person move me so much and I have no idea who this other person is? And it was then that I said, I really got to sink my teeth into this. And that's when I started to really collect. In the time frame of doing my studies, I had discovered Horst, Avedon, Penn, and although I never worked for Penn, I would say he would be the most significant influence both professionally and photo literature-wise, because it exposed me to a whole world that I was not aware of yet, or I was yet to become aware of. His important book, Moments Preserved, really kind of, I spent like a year and a half as a photo assistant trying to find this book. And I hadn't seen it, but yet in really poor condition, and I really wanted to hold it. I felt compelled to own it. I had that, compulsion to, possess something. Felt like I would have had a piece of his work. So it took me several years, and when I finally got the book in my hand in great condition, I was just, it was like a prize. It was like somebody had just given me a Van Gogh or something. The most expensive and beautiful thing anyone could have is the way I looked at it. It was like a sculpture. And when you get that feeling about photo literature, when a book becomes a sculpture, that is truly when photo literature grabs you. And that is really what I think that book did for me. I probably looked at the book 1,000 times and really understood what it meant for a photographer and a creative director / art director to collaborate and make a book. So for me, having this prize, this sculpture, was just a reminder every day that when you make it as a photographer, you still have to go back to your vision. You still have to contribute to what it is to be an artist, not just be a commercial artist. In collecting the books and building this aesthetic, I was most interested in the most important contributors within each genre, as opposed to the most famous person in the genre. So, and I'm not saying I didn't have those titles, but I said, I want like who immersed themselves into a subject matter that they exposed to all of us that we knew nothing about. And I know for myself, like seeing The Bike Riders by Danny Lyon, I was like, okay, I didn't know who Danny Lyon was, and I certainly didn't know what it was like to be in a gang. Of course, Larry Clark, Larry Clark's contribution with Tulsa, living with a group of addicts, was exposing me to something because I hadn't done drugs. So for me, I was like, wow, this is what it must really be like. So I started to become more and more inspired by people that weren't necessarily famous and popular. Sally Mann did something that no other photographer who had documented their children before or attempted to do. She was able to document a child through a child's eyes, not a superficial photograph of a pretty girl or an attractive boy. She was able to capture something about children always wanting to be something other than they are. And so to me, when I look at those photographs, I don't see images of her kids. I see, and being a father myself, I so respect, because it is impossible to try to get photographs of my own children, never mind create an art piece. And so she was able to really tap into what children, what they really are and who they want to be, not necessarily who they are at that age. And to me, that's why I'm a huge fan and have collected her for so many years. I had purchased an image at her show, and this was like the second Sally Mann image that I purchased from her, Vinland. She came over and said thank you, and just was very gracious. And I asked her if she'd sign my book, and she basically asked the kids I'd love to have the kids sign the book. Would it be okay? And she was like, of course, that'd be great. But she was not pushy about it, and basically asked the children, oh, hey, this is a person who collects our work, and would you guys agree to sign the book? And they were like, sure. So they just took the book themselves, and by the end of the night, they gave me the book back, and I had different inscriptions from the kids. That's probably in the whole collection one of the hardest ones to even part with. Susan Meiselas signed my first edition of Carnival Strippers, which is a tremendous body of work. And we had both won an award at the IPAs. And so we were sitting right next to each other, and I had known that prior. So I brought my Carnival Strippers book to Susan. I had it with me, and I didn't even need to ask. She saw it. And so we were sitting there, and we were in a group with my agent and other, I think Annie Leibowitz was even in that small circle of people, and we were just standing there, and she saw the book, and she was like, oh, this is great. Look, this young man has this book. And then we were introduced, and she was like, oh, congratulations. And I was like, congratulations to you. And she took the book and basically wrote, I don't even remember what's in it now, but I remember thinking, wow, this is why I collect books, to meet the people I meet. And it was fantastic. It was a great experience. The Iko Hosoi book that I had signed, that was an interesting evening because Hosoi was here from Japan, and he was putting on a live performance with one of the dancers, whom was the subject of the book. And this was now 35 years later or so. And it was a really beautiful conceptual performance. And I noticed this photographer walking around with his Leica, I believe it was. And I'm like, God, that gentleman looks like Bruce Davidson. And I see Hosoi walking around with his waist-level finder camera. So Hosoi is taking pictures of the dancer. And Bruce Davidson, as it turns out I was correct, is taking photographs of the dancer and Hosoi. And I thought, wow, this is a cool moment. And so I went to the gallerist, asked him if it would be appropriate to have him sign my book. And he said, sure. He took me in a side room and laid out the book, because it's a fold-out, and proceeded to just talk and tell me stories and talk about the dancer. And there was a translator there, so there were certain words that he couldn't understand that I was asking questions about. And it was an amazing evening. The Bechers, they moved me in their formal scientific approach and their notion of the photograph as record. I never got tired of looking at their work. And the installation that is in this auction is a 12-image collection. I think, to my knowledge, it is the largest installation they did, not in terms of the size of prints, but in terms of the number of prints. So I was really fortunate to have that piece. And as I said, I never got tired of looking at it, and it's a fantastic piece. A big piece, and you need a big place to hang it, but it's a fantastic piece. It would not be a bold statement to say that Ed Ruscha is the most important living contemporary artist. His influence crosses so many boundaries in so many areas. When I was exposed to Ed Ruscha and I started collecting Ed Ruscha books, I had a completely different perspective on the art world, contemporary art. In fact, Ed Ruscha is the one who got me into contemporary art. Partly was the reason I purchased the Bechers. Really just getting a different understanding, where I used to see banality as something that I wouldn't want to hang. And sometimes you have to stop and look at the photograph as a record and understand what that record is. And I think for me, people like the Bechers and Ruscha really created a kind of conceptual narrative that we all, as art collectors, aspire to understand and also aspire to collect. And once you get hooked on that, it's so plain as day. Could never afford an Ed Ruscha painting or drawing. So for me, having the ability to have the Bechers kind of really filled that contemporary art void, which ended up becoming my main focus of what artwork I would hang. So much of the artists that I've collected over the years have this type of elegant aesthetic, or so I like to call it. And, you know, Ed Ruscha being the most important figure in the art book genre, legitimate art pieces that's photo literature was fascinating to me. Winston Link, Aaron Siskin, Sally Mann, Irving Penn. The list goes on, but those are some of my favorite artists, and many of them appear in this auction.
For more information about this remarkable library and collection of photographs, please visit our website, swangalleries.com.